March 11th, 1968. Deep within the windowless, secure confines of the naval facility at Point Sur, California. An analyst stares at a reel of thermal paper slowly spooling from a low-frequency hydrophone receiver. The ink needle jumps. A sudden, violent spike scratches across the grid. It is an acoustic scar, a fraction of a second of concussive noise echoing across the vast, freezing expanse of the North Pacific. It is not a wail. It is not a seismic tremor. It is a death rattle. Thousands of miles away, plunging toward the abyssal plain, the Soviet ballistic missile submarine K-129 is tearing itself apart. Inside the Pentagon, and soon deep within the Directorate of Science and Technology at CYA headquarters in Langley, a terrifying and intoxicating realization begins to take shape. The Soviets have lost a Golf II-class submarine, a vessel packed with nuclear-tipped R-21 ballistic missiles, cutting-edge burst transmitters, and most crucially, the cryptographic rotors that encode the communications of the Soviet Pacific Fleet. It is the holy grail of Cold War intelligence, sitting perfectly intact at the bottom of the sea. But the ocean floor is an alien world. The K-129 rests at a depth far greater than the towering peaks of the Rocky Mountains. Down in this lightless void, the temperature hovers just above freezing. The ambient pressure is absolute, fierce enough to crumple reinforced submarine steel like a discarded candy wrapper and force water molecules straight through solid glass. The Soviet High Command knows their submarine is gone, but they do not know where. For 2 agonizing months, a massive Soviet flotilla scours the Pacific. Destroyers run endless grid patterns. Sonar pings echo into the deep, returning nothing but the cold silence of the trench. The Soviet admirals are blind. Their search parameters are flawed. Defeated, bleeding fuel and morale, the Soviet fleet turns back to Vladivostok. They leave their dead behind. They assume the crushing blackness of the Pacific has swallowed their secrets permanently. They believe the ocean is a vault that cannot be picked. They are wrong. American acoustic intelligence, the ultra-secret SOSUS network, has triangulated the exact location of the wreck. The CIA knows precisely where the prize lies, but knowing the location is merely the prologue to an impossible paradox. How do you steal a waterlogged, radioactive steel leviathan weighing more than 3 fully loaded freight trains? How do you reach down into a pressurized abyss and hoist a fragile, rotting tube of steel straight up through miles of hostile water? And the most paralyzing constraint of all, how do you do it in broad daylight, while Soviet spy trawlers patrol the very same waters, without triggering World War III? It requires a leap of engineering so audacious, so recklessly expensive, and so deeply classified that even the men drafting the blueprints believe it is science fiction. It requires building a machine that has never existed. It requires lying to the entire planet. Before we breach the vault on this $800 million ghost story, verify your clearance. Hit subscribe. Leave a like. It is the only signal we have that the declassified truth is still being received on the outside. Now, back to the crushing dark. The problem sits on the desks of the CIA's most paranoid architects. The risk of discovery is absolute. The cost of failure is catastrophic. A single leaked memo, a single snapped cable, a single loose word, and the Cold War goes instantly, irreversibly hot. The sheer madness of the proposal demands a cover story so massive, so flamboyant that it hides the truth in plain sight. They need a ghost. They need an eccentric billionaire willing to lend his name to a multi-million-dollar lie. A lie massive enough to distract a world already tearing itself apart. 1968 is a powder keg with a burning fuse. The geopolitical landscape of the planet is fracturing violently in real time. In the jungles of Southeast Asia, The Tet Offensive is bleeding the American military machine. In Eastern Europe, the Soviet Union is crushing the Prague Spring beneath the heavy steel treads of its armored divisions. In the Sea of Japan, North Korea has brazenly captured the USS Pueblo, an American intelligence ship, seizing highly classified cryptologic equipment. The world is loud, chaotic, and dangerously close to the brink. But the true war, the conflict that will ultimately dictate the survival or extinction of the human species, is entirely silent. It is entirely invisible. This is a war of mutually assured destruction. The doctrine of MADE rests upon a fragile, paranoid equilibrium known as the nuclear triad. Strategic bombers in the sky, land-based intercontinental ballistic missiles buried in the earth, and nuclear submarines patrolling the deep. Bombers can be tracked by long-range radar. Missile silos can be photographed and targeted by low-orbit Corona spy satellites. They are known quantities sitting on a heavily monitored global chessboard. But submarines are ghosts. They are the ultimate, terrifying trump card of the Cold War. A single ballistic missile submarine, slipping undetected beneath the thermocline layers of the ocean, holds enough localized atomic firepower to erase the entire eastern seaboard in a blinding flash of unholy light. By the late 1960s, the Soviet Pacific Fleet is aggressively expanding its maritime reach, pushing these mechanical ghosts ever closer to the American coastline. The K-129 is one of these phantoms. It is a Gulf II-class diesel-electric submarine, a heavily modified workhorse of the Soviet strategic deterrent. Encased within its sail are 3 R-21 ballistic missiles. These are not conventional tactical weapons designed for ship-to-ship combat. Each R-21 carries a 1-megaton thermonuclear warhead. That is a destructive yield over 60 times more powerful than the bomb that vaporized Hiroshima. A singular package of annihilation engineered to instantaneously incinerate the naval yards of San Diego or turn the city of Honolulu into a lake of radioactive glass. Yet, to the ruthless pragmatists inside the Directorate of Science and Technology at the CIA, these city-killer missiles are merely a secondary prize. The true treasure, the singular objective that justifies risking a global thermonuclear holocaust, lies buried within the submarine's cramped radio room. The Soviet cryptographic equipment, the cipher machines, the daily codebooks, the mechanical rotors that scramble the fleet's communications into unbreakable static. In the Shadow War, information is the absolute weapon. Bullets and bombs are tools of last resort. Signals intelligence is the tip of the spear. If the United States intelligence apparatus can secure the physical cryptographic machines of a frontline Soviet nuclear submarine, they can reverse engineer the complex mathematical algorithms protecting the Soviet Navy. They can read the enemy's mail in real time. They can anticipate every submarine deployment, track every patrol route, and effectively neutralize the entire Soviet sea-based nuclear deterrent. To capture these codebooks is to strip the Soviet Union of its armor without firing a single shot. It is the intelligence equivalent of reading the opposing command's playbook before they even deploy their forces. The KGB and the Soviet Naval High Command understand the profound vulnerability of these secrets. They are deeply paranoid, rigorously disciplined, and completely unyielding in their operational security protocols. However, in the spring of 1968, as the wrecked hull of the K-129 settles into the silent silt of the ocean floor, the Soviet hierarchy breathes a morbid, exhausted sigh of relief. Their logic is cold, calculated, and fatally flawed. Moscow knows their submarine has perished. Under the command of Fleet Admiral Sergei Gorshkov, the Soviet Navy has expended millions of rubles, burned through vast reserves of marine diesel, and exhausted their Pacific Fleet in a frantic, desperate search operation. For weeks, they have dragged crude sonar arrays across thousands of square miles of the punishing North Pacific. They have deployed aircraft, destroyers, and rescue tugs. They have found nothing. The ocean has simply swallowed their men, their missiles, and their invaluable codes. The internal monologue within the Kremlin is one of grim rationalization. Soviet logic dictates that if their own massive, unified military apparatus, searching near their own operational zones, cannot locate the wreckage, the Americans certainly cannot. Furthermore, the Soviet engineers believe the ocean itself is the ultimate, impenetrable vault. The K-129 rests at a depth of roughly 16,500 feet, 3 miles down. At this extreme depth, the ocean is an alien, hostile universe completely devoid of light. The temperature hovers just a fraction of a degree above freezing, but it is the hydrostatic pressure that serves as the true, invincible guardian of the deep. 3 miles beneath the waves, the ambient pressure exceeds 7,000 pounds per square inch. It is an invisible, crushing, omnipresent force equivalent to balancing a fully loaded commercial freight train on the surface of a postage stamp. The Soviets know the physics. They know that at this depth, standard military steel cracks and implodes like brittle plastic. They know that human physiology instantaneously collapses. They know that no submarine rescue vehicle on the face of the Earth can dive that deep, let alone operate heavy machinery in the suffocating, freezing darkness. The ocean floor is the perfect tomb. It is inaccessible. It is inviolate. The Soviet secrets are safe, permanently crushed beneath a column of water heavier than a mountain range. This is their ultimate blind spot. The Soviet High Command vastly underestimates the sheer, sociopathic audacity of the American intelligence apparatus. They cannot comprehend a rival nation willing to funnel a black budget, an amount equivalent to constructing a small modern metropolitan city from the ground up, into a classified project designed to perform the physical equivalent of blindfolding a man on the roof of the Empire State Building and asking him to pick up a dime on the sidewalk using a piece of string. The Shadow War is not fought with conventional military common sense. It is fought with infinite black budgets, slide rules, and ruthless imagination. While the defeated Soviet fleet turns back to the port of Vladivostok, resigning their lost submarine to the abyss, American acoustic analysts in windowless, highly secured bunkers along the west coast are meticulously calculating triangulation vectors. The SOSIS network, a sprawling, highly classified spiderweb of underwater hydrophones laid silently across the Pacific Ocean floor, has captured the precise, violent acoustic signature of the K-129 imploding. The Americans do not need to blindly search the vast Pacific. They have the precise X on the map. They possess the exact pinpoint coordinates of the Holy Grail. But a map is not a solution. The coordinates are merely the prologue to the most complex, expensive engineering nightmare ever conceived by the human mind. The United States faces an unprecedented strategic imperative. The gap in actionable intelligence regarding Soviet missile telemetry and submarine communications is a fatal vulnerability. It is a blind spot that could cost tens of millions of American lives if the Cold War suddenly ignites into a hot, radioactive exchange. The Pentagon demands answers. The CIA demands the codebooks. The National Security Agency demands the burst transmitters. To secure these assets, they must invade a physical domain vastly more hostile than the vacuum of outer space. They must bypass the Soviet assumption of absolute safety. They must turn the impossible physics of the deep ocean into a workable, deployable engineering reality. The enemy sleeps soundly, confident in the impenetrable, crushing darkness of the Pacific Trench. The enemy believes the pressure of the abyss is their absolute, unbreakable shield. They do not realize the CIA is already drafting the blueprints to steal the seabed itself. They do not realize the invisible threat is no longer the sunken Soviet submarine, but the colossal, silent machinery of American espionage preparing to reach down into the abyss and rip the ultimate secret straight up into the light. The fluorescent lights of a secure sub-basement in Langley hum with a low, anemic electrical buzz. It is 1969. Spread across a vast oak drafting table is a schematic that defies the laws of physics, naval architecture, and basic human sanity. John Parangosky, the CIA's head of the Directorate of Science and Technology, stares at the blueprints. The math is brutal. The math is unforgiving. They must lift an object weighing nearly 2,000 tons, the equivalent weight of 10 fully loaded Boeing 747 commercial airliners, from a depth of 3 miles. They must do this using a string of steel pipe. If the pipe is too thin, it will snap under the sheer, unimaginable gravity of its own hanging weight. If the pipe is too thick, the ship above will instantly capsize, dragged down into the abyss by the pendulum swing of its own creation. This is Project Azorian. There is no precedent. There is no manual. The men tasked with solving this are not frontline spies or seasoned naval commandos. They are the white-shirt heroes of the Cold War. They are aerospace engineers from Lockheed. They are offshore oil drillers from Global Marine. They are men armed with nothing but slide rules, black coffee, and a classified blank check budget that will ultimately swell to over $800 million. Enough capital to single-handedly fund the Apollo lunar surface missions. They face a three-dimensional nightmare. First, the kinetic violence of the ocean surface. The North Pacific is a hostile, churning wasteland. The surface ship will be battered by 20-foot swells, violently pitching, rolling, and heaving. If the ship rises 20 feet on a wave, the 3-mile pipe hanging beneath it will violently jerk upward 20 feet. At the bottom of that pipe, the kinetic whiplash would instantly shatter the fragile, waterlogged hull of the Soviet submarine like a porcelain teacup struck by a sledgehammer. To neutralize the ocean, the engineers must invent the heave compensator. It is a mechanical shock absorber of apocalyptic proportions. It requires building a central gimbal system, a massive, freely pivoting cradle constructed from forged steel, weighing more than a heavy battle tank. This gimbal will house the derrick and isolate the entire lifting mechanism from the motion of the ship. The ship can violently roll in a typhoon, but the central pipe string will remain perfectly, eerily still, dead plumb to the center of the earth. Second, they must build the hand that will grab the ghost. Inside the heavily guarded, windowless hangars of the Lockheed Corporation in Redwood City, California, engineers are designing the capture vehicle. They call her Clementine. She is an underwater claw the size of a city block. Her hydraulic fingers are designed to straddle the ruined hull of the K-129, delicately sliding beneath the crushed steel, before locking shut with enough grip force to crush a freight train. But Clementine must operate in pitch blackness. She must be flown remotely at the end of a 3-mile tether, guided only by primitive sonar, closed-circuit television cameras built to withstand pressures that would turn standard glass into radioactive dust, and the raw nerve of the operator sitting in a control room miles above. The internal monologue of the Lockheed engineers is a loop of constant, waking terror. If the hydraulic fluid freezes, the claw jams. If the claw jams, the submarine slips. If the submarine slips, the nuclear warheads detonate or scatter across the seabed, instantly triggering a geopolitical apocalypse. Third, they need the ship itself. It cannot be a conventional naval vessel. A gray-hulled U.S. Navy destroyer hovering over the exact coordinates of a lost Soviet submarine for months on end is an immediate declaration of war. The KGB would realize the objective in seconds. The Soviet Pacific Fleet would swarm the coordinates. The mission would end in a fiery exchange of anti-ship missiles. The CIA needs a ghost. They need a cover story so blindingly spectacular, so thoroughly capitalist, that the Soviet intelligence apparatus will completely dismiss it as eccentric American greed. They need Howard Hughes. Hughes is the ultimate wild card. He is a reclusive, deeply paranoid billionaire, completely insulated from the public eye, operating a sprawling empire of aviation and defense contracts. The CIA approaches the Summa Corporation, Hughes's holding company. The pitch is simple, audacious, and completely fabricated. They will tell the world that Howard Hughes is building the largest, most advanced mining ship in human history to harvest manganese nodules from the deep ocean floor. It is a lie of staggering proportions. The CIA literally invents a fake global industry overnight. They plant articles in trade magazines. They establish shell companies. They leak geological reports about the untold billions sitting in manganese deposits off the coast of Hawaii. The global press swallows the narrative whole. The Soviet intelligence analysts in Moscow read the reports, laugh at the arrogant American billionaire throwing his fortune into the ocean, and look away. The cover is perfect. The fabrication is flawless. Under this impenetrable veil of corporate eccentricity, the Sun Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company in Pennsylvania begins constructing the Hughes Glomar Explorer. She is a monstrosity of naval architecture. Stretching longer than 2 professional football fields laid end to end, she is an optical illusion in steel. From the outside, she looks like an overgrown oil drilling rig, but her belly holds a dark, classified secret. Directly in the center of the ship is the moon pool. It is a massive set of steel doors built into the bottom of the hull. It is a portal to the abyss. When the ship arrives over the target, these doors will slide open, exposing the interior of the vessel directly to the ocean. Clementine, the massive capture claw, will be lowered straight down through the bottom of the ship, completely hidden from the prying lenses of Soviet spy satellites passing overhead. When the Soviet submarine is finally hauled up, it will be pulled directly into the belly of the Glomar Explorer, and the moon pool doors will close beneath it. The entire heist will happen from the inside out. Not a single piece of the K-129 will ever break the surface of the water where an enemy camera could see it. The logistics of building the Glomar Explorer demand a level of compartmentalization that fractures the minds of the men working on it. The shipbuilders in Pennsylvania do not know what the Lockheed engineers in California are building. The Lockheed engineers do not know the exact coordinates mapped by the acoustic analysts in Washington. The operation is a jigsaw puzzle where no single man, save for a highly restricted inner circle at Langley, holds the picture on the front of the box. They are ordering specialty steel alloys in quantities so massive it triggers internal audits within the American manufacturing sector. They are machining sections of lifting pipe, each 60 feet long, weighing tens of thousands of pounds, with threads cut to microscopic tolerances. If a single thread on a single pipe fails, the entire 3-mile string will instantly shear, plunging billions of dollars and the greatest intelligence prize in history back into the freezing dark. The timeline is equally punishing. Every day that passes is a day the wreckage degrades. Salt water is relentlessly eating away at the K-129's pressure hull. The radioactive core of the submarine is silently reacting with the crushing depths. The Soviet Navy is constantly rotating new intelligence trawlers through the Pacific. The white shirt heroes work in shifts, fueled by adrenaline and the terrifying knowledge of what is at stake. They stand in front of massive chalkboards, writing and rewriting tensile strength equations. They test the hydraulic clamps in massive hyperbaric chambers, watching the thick steel warp under the simulated pressure of the Mariana Trench. They are designing a machine to steal a nightmare. They are engineering an impossibility. They calculate the shear strength of the pipe. They calculate the pitch and roll of the Pacific. They calculate the exact moment the metal will scream and tear. They build the derrick, they build the heave compensator, they build the miles of heavy steel pipe. They build the Hughes Glomar Explorer, a 36,000-ton titan of deception, completely unarmed, slow, and entirely reliant on the illusion of Howard Hughes's madness to protect it from the heavily armed Soviet warships it will soon sit beside. By the summer of 1974, the blueprints have become steel. The slide rule calculations have become humming hydraulic reality. The lie has been sold to the world. The Glomar Explorer slips its moorings and sails into the vast open expanse of the Pacific Ocean. The engineers watch it go from the shoreline. Their internal monologues are entirely silent now. There is no more math to do. There are no more equations to solve. They have built the greatest, most expensive mechanical thief in the history of human conflict. Now, they must pray that physics and the terrifying dark of the ocean floor will let them get away with it. They are sailing into the abyss. July 4th, 1974. The abyss lies directly beneath the keel of the Hughes Glomar Explorer. It holds its position over a desolate, featureless expanse of the North Pacific. The Hughes Glomar Explorer holds its position over a desolate, featureless expanse of blue water. Beneath the keel lies the abyss. The operation is officially designated Project Azorian. The cover story, Deep-Sea Manganese Nodule Mining, is fully operational, broadcast to the world via corporate press releases and fabricated geological surveys. The men on the deck wear the hard hats and grease-stained overalls of civilian offshore drillers. But inside the heavily soundproofed, highly compartmentalized control rooms buried deep within the ship's superstructure, the atmosphere is suffocating with geopolitical dread. The execution begins. Deep within the belly of the ship, the moon pool doors slide open. The Pacific Ocean violently surges into the containment bay. Hanging directly above this churning enclosed sea is Clementine, the massive capture vehicle. It is a terrifying feat of industrial engineering, a mechanical spider forged from high-yield steel, possessing an operational footprint the size of a suburban intersection. The descent is not a drop. It is an agonizing, microscopic crawl. The drill crew must assemble the lifting pipe, one 60-foot segment at a time. Each segment is a hollow steel cylinder weighing tens of thousands of pounds, roughly the mass of a fully loaded city bus. The threads on each pipe are machined to microscopic tolerances. If a single grain of grit compromises the threading, if the torque is applied a fraction of a degree off-center, the entire structural integrity of the pipe string will instantaneously shear. They thread the steel, they apply the torque. They lower the string, they thread the steel. They apply the torque, they lower the string. This punishing, monotonous rhythm continues for days. Hour by hour, the pipe string descends into the freezing darkness, growing exponentially heavier. By the time the capture vehicle breaches the 10,000-foot mark, the Glomar Explorer is dangling a pendulum of steel weighing over 4 million pounds, a dead weight heavier than a fully fueled space shuttle on its launch pad. The sheer kinetic energy stored in that hanging pipe is a loaded spring. If it snaps, the whiplash will travel upward at the speed of sound, obliterating the derrick and instantly capsizing the vessel. Then the radar alarms scream. On the bridge, the mission commander stares at the green sweep of the screen. A surface contact is rapidly closing in from the west. It is the Chazma, a Soviet Navy space tracking and intelligence ship. Behind it trails a Soviet ocean-going tug, heavily bristling with antennae and direction-finding equipment. The Soviets have arrived. The internal monologue of the CIA mission director is a violent cascade of worst-case scenarios. Have they broken the cover story? Do they know we are hovering directly over the grave of their nuclear deterrent? Are they preparing to board? The Glomar Explorer is entirely unarmed. It is a 36,000-ton sitting duck. The Soviet ships close the distance until they are a mere 200 yards off the port bow. Soviet sailors crowd the decks of the Chashma, pressing high-powered binoculars and telephoto lenses against their faces. A Soviet Kamov helicopter aggressively lifts off from the deck of the tracker, its rotor wash violently kicking up the Pacific spray, and begins making dangerously low, aggressive passes directly over the Glomar's derrick. The tension on the American bridge is absolute. The directive from Langley is unwavering. Maintain the illusion. Do not flinch. Do not alter course. Do not deploy weapons. Do not reach for the encrypted radios. The Americans play the part of bored, irritated civilian miners. They stand on the deck. They drink coffee. They stare back at the heavily armed Soviet military apparatus with rehearsed corporate apathy. They hold their nerve while standing literally 3 miles above the radioactive corpse of the K-129. The psychological warfare continues for 2 agonizing weeks. The Soviets circle. They hover. They photograph every inch of the Glomar. Eventually, convinced they are merely watching an eccentric American billionaire waste a fortune dragging pipes through empty mud, the Chashma turns its bow toward Vladivostok and steams away. The cover story holds. The ghost is unseen. Below the ship, 3 miles down in the pitch blackness, Clementine finally reaches the seabed. The control room monitors flicker to life. The high-intensity strobe lights, engineered to withstand pressures that would crush standard glass into microscopic powder, pierce the abyssal gloom. There, half buried in the silt, rests the K-129. It is a mangled, haunting shipwreck. The hull is violently twisted. The missile bay doors are buckled. It is a monument to the terrifying violence of hydrostatic implosion. The operators grip the joysticks. They are flying a massive mechanical claw at the end of a 3-mile wet noodle. The delay between command and execution is agonizing. They inch the capture vehicle over the rotting hull. The acoustic sensors ping. The sonar maps the steel. Slowly, deliberately, the massive hydraulic arms of Clementine slide down into the freezing mud, perfectly straddling the girth of the Soviet submarine. The command is given. The hydraulic pumps scream. The fingers close. The steel bites into the titanium and iron of the K-129. The pressure dials in the control room spike violently. The massive heave compensator on the deck groans as millions of pounds of dead weight are suddenly transferred to the derrick. The lift begins. It is a millimeter-by-millimeter extraction. They pull the submarine out of the suction of the seafloor. The ocean actively fights the intrusion. The current pushes against the massive surface area of the hanging wreck. The Glomar shudders. For days, the winch hauls the prize upward. 14,000 feet, 12,000 feet, 10,000 feet, they are halfway home. The code books, the nuclear torpedoes, the mechanical rotors, the greatest intelligence cache in modern history is slowly ascending toward the light. Then, at 9,000 feet, the crisis strikes. It happens without warning. It is violent. It is catastrophic. The high-yield manganese steel of Clementine's forward hydraulic claws, subjected to unimaginable freezing temperatures and millions of pounds of shear stress, suddenly turns brittle. A deafening, concussive crack violently echoes up the 3-mile pipe string, shaking the entire Glomar Explorer like a localized earthquake. The tension meters in the control room drop precipitously. On the blurry, low-resolution closed-circuit monitors, the operators witness a nightmare unfolding in real time. 2 of the massive capture arms have shattered. The structural integrity of the cradle is critically compromised. The immense, uneven distribution of weight instantly fractures the weakened, waterlogged hull of the K-129. The submarine snaps in half. The aft section, containing the R-21 ballistic missiles with their 1-megaton thermonuclear warheads, completely breaks free. It slides out of the surviving claws. It plummets back into the crushing darkness. The Americans watch in paralyzed horror as thousands of tons of radioactive steel, explosives, and the rear compartments of the submarine vanish from the camera feeds, plunging 9,000 feet back to the ocean floor. The kinetic shock wave of the breaking steel violently whips the pipe string. The derrick on the Glomar violently sways. The engineers hold their breath, bracing for the entire multi-million-dollar assembly to tear itself apart and drag them to the bottom. The pipe string groans, violently vibrates, but miraculously, it holds. The control room is dead silent. The mission commander stares at the monitors. They have lost the missiles. They have lost 2/3 of the submarine. But the forward section, the section containing the torpedo room, the sonar arrays, and potentially the highly classified cryptographic radio room, is still violently swinging in the remaining crippled grip of the capture vehicle. It is hanging by a literal thread of stressed steel. The engineers face an impossible decision. If they drop the remaining piece, the entire $800 million mission is a catastrophic failure. If they continue to lift, the violently swinging, jagged wreckage could snag the sides of the moon pool, tearing a hole in the bottom of the Glomar and sinking the ship entirely. The directive remains cold. The mission is absolute. They continue the lift. The ascent becomes a crawl of sheer, unfiltered terror. Every hour is a battle against the degrading grip of the remaining hydraulic fingers. They listen to the screech of twisting metal echoing through the water. They watch the tension dials violently fluctuate. 8,000 feet. 5,000 feet, 1,000 feet, 1,000 air. The mangled, dripping forward section of the Soviet submarine breaches the surface of the enclosed moon pool. It is a jagged, rusting monument to the Shadow War. The water inside the pool violently churns. The radioactive alarms begin to buzz a low, steady warning. The massive steel doors at the bottom of the hull slowly, mechanically slide shut. The locks engage, the seal is made, the ocean is sealed out. The crisis has been survived. The ghost is finally locked inside the cage. Now, they just have to look it in the eye. To drain the cage, the heavy industrial pumps of the Glomar Explorer roar to life with a deafening mechanical fury. Millions of gallons of freezing Pacific seawater are violently purged from the moon pool. As the waterline recedes, the ghost is finally exposed to the harsh, artificial glare of the ship's internal halogen floodlights. It is a grotesque, mangled cathedral of high-yield steel. The forward section of the Soviet ballistic missile submarine K-129 hangs suspended in the cradle. Dripping black mud, radioactive sludge, and the freezing brine of the abyss. The stench is immediate and overpowering. It is the suffocating odor of stale diesel fuel, battery acid, hydrogen sulfide, and death. The white-shirt heroes step back. The shadow warriors step forward. Teams of CIA technical intelligence officers encased head-to-toe in heavily pressurized, bright yellow hazmat suits descend onto the rotting deck. They carry Geiger counters, heavy cutting torches, and the burden of history. They are not walking onto a ship. They are trespassing into a sovereign, heavily irradiated Soviet vault. The entry is brutally slow. The pressure hull is violently warped, compressed by the unimaginable hydrostatic forces of the deep ocean. The technicians ignite their plasma torches. Sparks cascade violently against the rusted titanium and iron. They slice through the armored bulkheads. They breach the watertight doors. They step inside the tomb. The interior is a frozen chaotic time capsule of catastrophic destruction. Tangled nests of shredded wiring, crushed instrumentation panels, and the macabre, haunting remains of the Soviet crew are suspended in a thick, toxic slurry of decaying organic matter and engine oil. The silence inside the hull is absolute. It is the silence of a battle already lost. But to the analysts waiting back in Langley, this mangled steel carcass is a goldmine of unprecedented strategic value. The submarine fractured during the ascent, sending the ballistic missiles and the coveted cryptographic radio room plunging back into the dark. Yet, the forward section captured within the Glomar's belly holds secrets capable of unilaterally shifting the global balance of power. The intelligence extraction is meticulous, clinical, and completely ruthless. They find the nuclear torpedoes. These are not standard anti-ship weapons. These are localized weapons of mass destruction, engineered to vaporize an entire American carrier strike group in a single boiling flash of underwater atomic fire. By capturing these pristine warheads, American nuclear physicists gain unfettered, direct access to the pinnacle of Soviet weapons design. They dissect the trigger mechanisms. They analyze the fissile material yields. They map the exact metallurgical composition of the warhead casings. They learn exactly how the enemy intends to fight the apocalypse. They find the sonar arrays. This is the true silent victory of the operation. The forward dome of the K-129 contains the complete, highly classified acoustic sensors of the Soviet Pacific Fleet. In the shadow war of the ocean depths, stealth is the only currency that matters. Submarines are blind. They navigate, hunt, and survive entirely by sound. By physically possessing the Soviet sonar equipment, American naval engineers achieved the impossible. They reverse engineer the mechanical ears of the enemy. They discover the exact frequencies the Soviets are listening for. They map the precise acoustic blind spots in the Soviet tracking algorithms. The strategic payoff is instantaneous and devastating. Armed with this hypergranular acoustic data, the United States Navy redesigns the baffling and propeller systems of its own nuclear attack submarines. American vessels become acoustic phantoms. They can now slip past Soviet hydrophone nets entirely undetected, tailing Soviet boomers with impunity, holding the enemy's nuclear deterrent at knife point, without the Kremlin ever realizing they are being tracked. They capture the ship's logs. They recover technical manuals, operational doctrine documents, and heavily waterlogged personal diaries. They analyze the titanium alloys used in the pressure hull, feeding the data directly back to the aerospace engineers at Skunk Works and Lockheed. The triumph is entirely bloodless. It is entirely invisible. Half a world away, deep within the heavily fortified five-sided labyrinth of the Pentagon, the Joint Chiefs of Staff review the initial intelligence reports. The internal monologue of the American admirals is one of cold, calculating euphoria. We have their weapons. We have their sensors. We possess the anatomical blueprint of their sea-based survival. The intelligence gap has not merely been closed. It has been violently, permanently inverted. The operation proves a fundamental, terrifying theorem of the Cold War. The Soviet High Command had bet their survival on the impenetrable physics of the ocean floor. They believed a 3-mile column of freezing water, exerting thousands of pounds of pressure per square inch, was a vault that no nation on Earth could crack. They believed the deep ocean was an absolute sanctuary. Project Azorian shatters that sanctuary into microscopic fragments. The CIA has proven that the United States possesses an industrial and engineering capability so vastly superior, so heavily funded, and so aggressively audacious that no Soviet secret is safe anywhere on the planet. The Americans have successfully reached into the darkest, most hostile environment on Earth and stolen a multi-thousand-ton prize directly out from under the noses of the Soviet Pacific Fleet. The balance of global power silently tilts on its axis. No bombs are dropped. No sirens wail. No diplomats scream across the floors of the United Nations. The victory is secured entirely in the shadows, written in the language of slide rule mathematics, deep-sea hydraulics, and classified metallurgical analysis. In Moscow, the Soviet admirals sleep soundly, completely oblivious to the theft. They still believe their submarine is resting peacefully in the abyss. They still believe their nuclear torpedo designs are secure. They still believe their sonar arrays are cutting edge. They are fighting a war with a compromised playbook. The Americans are reading their strategies, neutralizing their weapons, and rendering their naval deterrent obsolete. The intelligence coup is a masterpiece of deception and engineering. It justifies every single dollar of the astronomical black budget. It validates the paranoia. It proves that in the high-stakes chess game of mutually assured destruction, the winner is not the nation with the most missiles. The winner is the nation that can see in the dark, the nation that can engineer the impossible, and the nation that can steal the unstealable without ever making a sound. But no secret stays silent forever. Decades later, the silence breaks. The black ink of the classified archives eventually fades. Decades pass. The Freedom of Information Act finally strips the redactions from the history books, revealing the staggering arithmetic of the Shadow War. Project designation, Azorian, often erroneously reported by the global press under its compartmentalized security clearance, Project Jennifer. Total black budget expenditure, exceeding $800 million in 1974 currency. A financial payload comparable to launching a crewed Apollo mission to the lunar surface, spent entirely on a single, deniable theft. Operational depth, 16,500 feet. A pressurized nightmare where the ocean exerts over 7,000 pounds of crushing force upon every square inch of exposed steel. Hardware specs, the Hughes Glomar Explorer. 36,000 tons of forged structural steel, 619 feet of maritime deception, operating under the guise of deep-sea mining. The human cost, 6 Soviet submariners were recovered from the dripping wreckage of the K-129. They were given a formal military burial at sea. The ceremony was conducted in complete silence by CIA operatives, broadcast only to a classified camera lens. The tape was locked in a Langley vault, handed to the Russian Federation in 1992 as a morbid, belated token of diplomatic closure. The legal legacy. When investigative journalists finally broke the cover story in 1975, the CIA forged a legal shield that protects the intelligence apparatus to this day. It is known as the Glomar response. We can neither confirm nor deny the existence of the information requested. Project Azorian was a highly classified, heavily compartmentalized triumph of Cold War espionage. But its mechanical DNA is permanently grafted onto the architecture of the modern world. The white shirt heroes of Lockheed and Global Marine did not just build a localized thief to steal a singular submarine. They inadvertently conquered the abyss, the unprecedented technology engineered to stabilize the Glomar Explorer, the massive heave compensators, the computer-controlled dynamic acoustic positioning systems that held a 36,000-ton vessel perfectly stationary over a target 3 miles down, birthed the modern deep-ocean offshore industry. Look at the towering, multi-billion-dollar deep-water oil rigs extracting crude from the crushing depths of the Gulf of Mexico. They operate on the exact mathematical principles drafted in the windowless sub-basements of the CIA. Look at the thousands of miles of fiber-optic cables crisscrossing the abyssal plains. These fragile glass threads carry 99% of the global internet, the international banking sector, and encrypted military communications. The remotely operated vehicles, the deep-sea robotic drones that splice those cables, repair those pipes, and map the lightless frontiers of our planet, are the direct evolutionary descendants of Clementine. The CIA taught the world how to operate in a dimension previously thought impenetrable by human engineering. And in doing so, they opened an entirely new, invisible theater of silent warfare. The audacity of Project Azorian proved that the ocean floor was no longer a sanctuary. It led directly to operations like Ivy Bells, where American attack submarines used this exact deep-sea engineering lineage to physically tap Soviet communication cables at the bottom of the Sea of Okhotsk. The battlefield merely shifted from stealing dead submarines to stealing live, encrypted data. The rules of the game were permanently rewritten. The Cold War is overwhelmingly remembered as a terrifying static standoff of nuclear stockpiles. It is taught as a high-stakes, paranoid staring contest where the loser would inevitably ignite the atmosphere in a storm of thermonuclear fire. But the true conflict, the granular war of survival, was never strictly about who could build the biggest hydrogen bomb. It was a war of intellectual, logistical, and financial attrition. It was a conflict won by the nation possessing the terrifying combination of infinite capital and absolute sociopathic imagination. The United States defeated the Soviet Union not by dropping a weapon from the sky, but by proving there was no physical domain, no geographic sanctuary, and no law of hydrodynamics that could protect a Soviet secret from American engineering. Project Azorian stands as the ultimate rusting monument to this era. It is the crystallization of the Shadow War. It was a multi-hundred-million-dollar lie wrapped in high-yield steel, executing a mission of impossible physics, all while the heavily armed enemy watched in complete, arrogant ignorance. It proves that the trajectory of history is not shaped by the loudest explosions, nor by the largest armies marching in the daylight. The most devastating victories are the ones where the enemy never even hears the machine turn on. The true victor of the Cold War simply engineered the impossible in the crushing dark and left the rest of the world completely blind to the theft.